Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Once Upon a Crime. It's Rocktober, which means I'm diving into true crime cases involving musical artists. This time, I'll bring you 3 stories about musicians who met tragic ends as victims of homicide. In this episode, a young Ohio man begins playing music before he is barely out of diapers. He and his brothers would form a band and shoot to the top of the charts. They were hometown heroes and certified music stars, but a baffling turn of events would end in a double tragedy. This is Chapter 1 in the Rocktober series, Murdered Musicians, Zapped, the life and death of funk musician Roger. Rufus and Addie Troutman raised their family in a 2-bedroom house in Hamilton, Ohio. This was no easy feat, seeing as they had 10 children and the home consisted of just 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Mom and Dad slept in one of the bedrooms, sharing it with their kids when they were babies. But once the children were old enough, they all piled into the bedroom and laid their heads wherever they found space. To say the family was close then was an understatement. The siblings became each other's best friends, loving each other intensely, and sometimes squabbling loudly, as children often do. But at the end of the day, they looked out for each other protectively, and all pitched in to help with the workload of being a large family. Their father, Rufus Troutman Sr., worked at a paper mill and drove a truck to provide for his large brood. Their mother, Addie, stayed home to raise the children and keep the home running smoothly. One day, Addie and Rufus took a trip to the local dollar store, bringing along their 3-year-old son, Roger. When they returned home, the toddler kept asking about a present he wanted his daddy to buy him. At first, his parents couldn't understand what the boy was asking for. He was so young that he didn't yet have the words for the present he desperately wanted. He kept saying, "Daddy, I want a la-di-da. I want a la-di-da." His father, perplexed, finally said, "Son, I'll take you back, and if you can tell me what a la-di-da is, I'll buy it for you." Roger excitedly entered the store, pulling his father along with his tiny hands. Eyes shining, he pointed to a rack of guitars hanging on one wall. "La-di-da," he cried. His father, as promised, bought him the guitar. Roger began learning the instrument, which rarely left his little hands. Before long, the family was astonished to discover that, copying artists he watched on television and later heard on the radio, the little boy was soon playing several songs by ear, and flawlessly. People stopped by to see the little boy play the guitar, and his parents were soon encouraged to have Roger perform. His mother wouldn't hear of it. Roger was too young, she said. But by the age of 6, she could no longer delay his musical debut, and he began performing in talent shows with his brothers and sisters. Hamilton, Ohio, the Troutmans' hometown, was located between 2 larger Ohio cities, Cincinnati to the south and Dayton to the north. After Roger's musical talent became apparent, some of his siblings also took up instruments. Roger encouraged his younger brother Lester to play drums. The 4 brothers, sometimes accompanied by their other siblings and relatives, began competing in local talent competitions. They won every competition easily. By the time Roger was a teen, he and 3 of his brothers had hit the road to play gigs all over Dayton and beyond. Calling themselves Little Roger and his Fabulous Bells, they played local clubs and school dances, and even performed on tennis courts where people gathered to dance. Wherever there was a stage, Roger and the band would perform blues, rock, and soul covers. When they weren't performing, they were practicing. By this time, Roger had graduated to electric guitar. Because it was too loud for him to practice in the family's home, he and his siblings set out to build a garage behind the house to use as a studio. The Troutman children had been taught the value of hard work by their parents. Rather than complaining about their limited resources, they pooled their time, energy, talents, and finances to secure whatever they needed. Addie Troutman recalled with pride how Roger taught himself to wire the cinder block structure with electricity to power their instruments. Roger had big dreams. His life was music, and he wanted to take his band to the top. Dayton, Ohio in the 1970s and early 1980s was an ideal place to make these dreams a reality. James Brown was already a musical legend when Roger Troutman was still a boy. Brown, who became known as the Godfather of Soul, had over a dozen chart-topping R&B hits by 1960. In the late 1950s, Brown recorded hits like Please, Please, Please and Try Me with his original band, the Famous Flames, on Cincinnati-based record label King Records. James Brown ushered in an era of danceable funk tunes, which led to other younger bands blending soul, funk, and disco into a new sound in the 1970s. Dayton, Ohio was a breeding ground for funk bands like Lakeside and the Ohio Players, both of which were from Dayton. These bands and others of this genre dominated the R&B charts with hits like Fire, Love Roller Coaster, and Fantastic Voyage. Funk, a music genre that originated predominantly in African American communities in the 1960s, consisted of danceable groove rhythms with heavy bass lines and pronounced percussion and brass instrument sections. Little Roger and his Fabulous Bells would rebrand themselves Roger and the Human Body. The band now consisted of Roger on lead guitar and vocals, his brother Lester on drums, brother Terry on bass, and Larry on congas, and serving as the band's manager. They became known as a tight funk band with a fabulous stage show. Roger was a consummate performer with a flair for the dramatic, who continually found new ways to wow the audience. The band's costumes were designed to be flashy: brightly colored bell-bottom trousers, satin shirts with wide lapels, and lots of sequins, a look made popular during the disco era. The choreography accompanying their stage shows was designed to get the crowd on the dance floor. Roger was known to surprise the audience by swinging onto the stage with a rope suspended from a balcony. Roger incorporated an electronic talk box into his music. The talk box is a musical effects device that modifies the sound of musical instruments by changing its frequency. Using this instrument, Roger could blend his voice with other instruments, like electronic keyboards, to create a unique sound through a speaker box attached to a plastic tube inserted into the mouth. Rapper Snoop Dogg would later recall the first time he heard a Roger song play on the radio. He was just a kid riding his bike around Long Beach, California, when he stopped in his tracks to listen. "It sounded like a damn robot voice," he exclaimed. "We didn't know what it was." Roger didn't invent the talk box, but was the first artist to make it a lead instrument. Other artists used the talk box in some of their songs, including George Harrison and Peter Frampton. Frampton famously used it on Show Me the Way, the breakout single from his multi-platinum album Frampton Comes Alive, released in 1976. Roger and the band became popular draws at dance clubs around Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio. Cincinnati native Bootsy Collins took notice of the band's unique sound and offered to introduce them to record producer George Clinton. Bootsy Collins, born William Earl Collins in 1951, formed a funk band with his brother, Catfish Collins, in the late 1960s. In 1970, James Brown hired the Collins brothers band, the Pacemakers, as his new backing band. Collins played bass and later made Rolling Stone's list of the 50 greatest bassists of all time, coming in at number 4. After leaving Brown's band, the Collins brothers connected with George Clinton, founder of the psychedelic funk movement of the 1970s. Bootsy Collins became part of Clinton's Parliament Funkadelic collective of musicians who dominated black music charts during the 1970s, with songs like One Nation Under a Groove. The collective performed under the band names Parliament and Funkadelic, and would collectively be known as P-Funk or the P-Funk Mob. The Collins brothers founded a band called Bootsy's Rubber Band as part of Clinton's collective. After hearing the Troutman brothers play, Collins and Clinton invited them to Detroit to lay down tracks for a demo record. In 1979, under the guidance of Bootsy Collins, Roger rebranded the band as Roger and Zapp. Zapp was Terry Troutman's childhood nickname, and it fit the band's high-energy performance and electric funk sound. Roger and Zapp were soon signed to a record deal with Warner Brothers Music. They recorded their first album, but after completing the tracks, they felt they were lacking a standout single. Roger returned to the studio and wrote More Bounce to the Ounce. Their album Zapp, distributed by Warner Brothers in 1980, was produced by Bootsy Collins and recorded at George Clinton's United Sound Studios in Detroit. It was Zapp's first record on a major label. Roger had released an independently produced album, Introducing Roger, on a private label in 1976. When their debut album Zapp was released in 1980, More Bounce shot up the charts, hitting number 2 on Billboard's Hot R&B list. The album went gold in November 1980, just days before Roger celebrated his 29th birthday. Soon after the success of the album Zapp, George Clinton began experiencing financial troubles and was subsequently dropped from the Warner Brothers label. Roger cut ties with Clinton and accepted a higher offer from Warner for the demo recordings they'd previously produced. Roger now had complete creative control over his music. In 1981, he released a solo project, The Many Facets of Roger, on the Warner Brothers label. He played all the instruments and created the audio mix. The album featured a cover of Marvin Gaye's I Heard It Through the Grapevine and an original song, So Rough, So Tough. Both songs were hits, with I Heard It Through the Grapevine shooting to number 1 on the R&B singles chart. The album sold over 1 million copies. Larry Troutman now took over the band's operations, including the studio they built in Dayton, Troutman Sound Lab, where they recorded all their music. Roger lived above the studio, working day and night to write, produce, and record new songs. The Troutmans, who'd grown up relatively poor, were now wealthy. They remained loyal to their Dayton hometown roots and wanted to give back to the community that was like family to them. They formed a nonprofit, Troutman Enterprises, to build and rehabilitate homes in the area for working families. They hired locals to do the construction and gave low-interest loans to new homeowners. One of the Troutman sisters became the first Black female to hold an electrician's license in Ohio. Troutman Enterprises also founded a limo bus service to transport the band and to bring in additional revenue as a for-hire transportation service. Dedicated to the ideals learned from their parents, hard work, love of family, and the value of $1, the band worked non-stop, playing gigs throughout the country and giving 110% of their energy and dedication to every show. Band members refrained from drugs and alcohol and required this of everyone who toured with the band. Although he never married, Roger fathered 11 children with several women, all of whom he supported financially. He remained in a common-law marriage with one of his partners, a woman named Mercedes. The Zapp band released its second album, Zapp 2, in 1982. It went gold, peaking at number 2 on the Billboard R&B chart. Zapp 3 was released a year later. It also reached gold, but wasn't the runaway success of Zapp or Zapp 2. In the mid-1980s, the popularity of dance music, which had begun during the disco era, trended downward with the rise of rap and hip-hop artists. Hip-hop gained momentum in the early 1990s and took over the airways and record charts, edging out more traditional R&B bands. Zapp's fourth album, The New Zapp for You, released in 1985, was the first Zapp release not to reach gold. However, the single Computer Love, featuring the vocals of longtime Zapp collaborator Shirley Murdock, climbed to number 8 on the Billboard R&B chart the following year. Roger began focusing on a solo career, gaining a foothold on the dance charts once again with his 1987 single, I Wanna Be Your Man. In 1992, the American economy was struggling, and with record sales flatlining, Troutman Enterprises was forced to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Larry, the band's older brother and business manager, was feeling the pressure, with the company's debts growing to over $4 million. Things began to look up for Zapp and Roger when West Coast hip-hop artists like Snoop Dogg and Ice Cube, who'd grown up listening to their music, started sampling Zapp tunes into their music in the mid-1990s. Rap lyrics and hip-hop beats were mixed with Roger and Zapp songs, including Computer Love, Do Wah Diddy, and More Bounce to the Ounce, which led to the discovery of the band by younger music fans. Artists as varied as Notorious B.I.G., Prince, MC Hammer, and Blackstreet sampled Zapp's music or were inspired by their sound. Then another big break came when rapper Tupac Shakur asked Roger to perform backing vocals featuring his iconic talkbox sound on Tupac's new single, California Love, in 1995. The chorus, California knows how to party, that's all Roger. Roger was featured in the video with Tupac and Dr. Dre. He's shown playing keyboards with a talkbox during a party. It became one of Tupac's most successful singles, reaching #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and being nominated for the Grammy Award for Best Rap Performance by a Duo or Group in 1997. The single sold over 2 million copies. Roger Troutman performed the song live with Tupac as the musical guest on Saturday Night Live on February 17, 1996. With Roger back in the spotlight, he began doubling down on his dream of having a solo career, writing, producing, and performing solo projects. He appeared as a guest artist on other hip-hop albums, including Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style and Eazy-E's Straight Off the Streets. Well, you know the rest of the title. I don't want to have to make this explicit content. His music was also featured in the soundtrack to the movie A Thin Line Between Love and Hate. Things were back on track, and Roger was experiencing renewed success in the music business. But behind the scenes, tension was brewing. Roger Troutman, now 48, was excited about his rebooted musical career in hip-hop. After 20 years in the business, he was eager to work as an independent artist. Meanwhile, the family business, Troutman Enterprises, was struggling financially. Larry Troutman, who managed the business, was stressed by a recent bankruptcy filing and the debts owed by the company. His children would later say that looking back, their father may have been struggling with depression. He was short-tempered and isolated himself, which was unlike him. Larry and Roger had always been close, and Roger had trusted his big brother enough to make him his personal business manager over a decade earlier. While the details remain a mystery, there were rumors that Larry and Roger may have argued over the business and Roger's solo career. Roger was considering replacing his brother with a new manager. On Sunday morning, April 25, 1999, Dayton police responded to a 911 call at 7:20 a.m. They arrived on scene to find Roger Troutman dead in the alleyway behind his studio. He had been shot twice in the chest and twice in the back and was pronounced dead at the scene. Witnesses say they saw Roger, who was sitting in the passenger seat of a black sedan, try to get out of the car, but the driver fired at him several times before fleeing. 4 minutes later, another call came into police dispatch. A black Lincoln had crashed into a tree only a half a mile from where Roger's body was discovered. When police arrived, they found 54-year-old Larry Troutman dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. A .357 caliber gun found with the body was later determined to be the same gun used in Roger's murder. The Troutman family and Dayton community were shocked and saddened by the double loss of life. They couldn't make sense of how and why this tragedy had occurred. Theories were floated around the community, most believing that financial pressures and arguments regarding business decisions lit a powder keg between two formerly inseparable brothers. Murder-suicide is a rare occurrence in the U.S., accounting for only 1,000 to 1,500 deaths per year. In contrast, approximately 22,000 murders occur annually overall. While men commit almost 90% of murder-suicides, most victims are their female intimate partners. I could find no statistics involving murder-suicides between male family members outside of a romantic partnership. The murder-suicide of Roger and Larry Troutman was something no one could have predicted. Their loved ones struggled with how best to process this tragedy. They loved both Roger and Larry, and felt both of their losses very deeply. Their brother Terry Troutman, interviewed by a reporter for SF Weekly, said, "I resent that my brother Roger is gone more than anything else in the world. I resent whatever sickness came over Larry that caused him to do something like that." Lester Troutman says he lost his two best friends, his two heroes. Everyone in the family lost two people they loved dearly. Two fathers, two brothers were gone in seconds when something inside Larry Troutman snapped, something no one had seen coming. "You can speculate, but you don't really know," their sister said. No one wanted to paint Larry as a monster. Although everyone hated what he'd done, they couldn't hate him. His niece said of her uncle Larry Troutman, "The person who did it felt so guilty, he only lived 4 minutes after. He thought, wait a minute, I don't deserve to live either." Larry, in pain and suffering from stress and depression, committed a desperate act he couldn't take back. Close family friend and Zapp vocalist Shirley Murdoch said, "When they found Larry, there were tears streaming down his face." The Troutman family held a joint funeral for Roger and Larry in Monroe, Ohio. Over 3,000 people, family, friends, and fans, were in attendance to say goodbye before the brothers were laid to rest together in a joint plot. No one could imagine the band without Roger. "It was over," was all I can think of, band member Dale DeGroat said. But Addie Troutman thought differently. She knew that her children needed to keep moving forward, together. Together they would heal, leaning on each other for strength. What better way to do that than to continue playing music together, she told them. Plus, it was a way to honor Roger. "It's what he would have wanted," she said. With her encouragement, the surviving band members came together and decided to continue the band, eventually recording under the independent label Zapped Records. In 2003, they released the album Zapp 6, backed by popular demand. While no longer producing records, they occasionally perform live shows at various venues across the U.S. During each show, they honor the band's founder, their brother Roger, by playing videos of some of his most iconic concert performances for the audience. Musical artists continue to discover Roger's unique sound and take inspiration from his music. T-Pain, Kanye West, DJ Quick, and others have all sampled Roger's music into their songs. That will do it for this episode of Once Upon a Crime. There are still 2 more episodes in Rocktober, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, hit follow on the show page and click the check button to turn on automatic downloads. Thanks. If you want even more Once Upon a Crime, join our Patreon. There are new tiers and perks for members, including bonus episodes every month, behind-the-scenes videos, and of course, all episodes ad-free. Go to patreon.com/onceuponacrime to find out more and join. Once Upon a Crime is written and produced by me, Esther Sanchez Ludlow. My executive producer is Lorena Garcia, and Emma Battaglia provided additional research for this episode. As always, thanks for listening and sharing the show with a friend. Until next time, be good to one another.